Thank you for visiting our channel. Please like, share and subscribe for more exciting food videos. Foraging and cooking with wild apples. Recipes and tips. Wild apples have been growing for thousands of years. They're a great source of fiber, vitamins and antioxidants. People used to eat them all the time, and they're still good for you today. They can be used in lots of recipes, from salads to desserts. Foraging for wild apples. When you head out to find wild apples, what do you look for? It's not just a matter of walking into the woods and grabbing any old apple. Wild apples can be tricky to identify, and there are rules to follow when foraging for them. Before you start, consider what you hope to find. Are you looking for a specific type of apple, or just something to use in a recipe? Identifying wild apple trees. Wild apple trees can be quite different from the ones you find in a grocery store. They're often smaller, with branches that grow in every direction. The leaves are usually a darker green, and the apples themselves can be smaller and more tart. Some common varieties of wild apples include the crabapple, which is known for its bright red skin and sour taste, and the wild red delicious, which has a sweet taste and a distinctive red stripe. To identify a wild apple tree, look for these characteristics: a single main trunk with branches that split off in different directions. Dark green leaves that are shaped like a teardrop. Apples that are small, often around 2 to 3 inches in diameter. Apples that are more tart than sweet, with a flavor that's often described as earthy or grassy. You might wonder, what's the best way to tell if an apple is ripe and ready to eat? A ripe wild apple will be slightly soft to the touch, and it will come off the tree easily. If it's hard to pull the apple off the tree, it's probably not ready yet. Regulations and permissions. Before you start foraging for wild apples, make sure you know the laws and regulations in your area. In some places, it's okay to forage for wild apples on public land, but in others, it's not allowed. You might need to get permission from a landowner if you want to forage on private property. Here are some things to consider. Check with your local government to see if there are any rules about foraging for wild apples in your area. Make sure you have permission to forage on private property. You don't want to get in trouble for trespassing. Be respectful of the land and the trees. Don't damage the trees or the surrounding area when you're foraging. Consider the time of year. Wild apples are usually ripe in the fall, but the exact time can vary depending on the variety and the weather. Foraging for wild apples can be a fun and rewarding experience, but it's also important to be safe and responsible. What precautions can you take to make sure you're foraging safely? Preparing wild apples for consumption. Once you've foraged for wild apples, it's essential to prepare them for consumption. This involves removing dirt, leaves, and debris, as well as storing them properly to maintain their freshness and flavor. You might be wondering, what's the best way to clean and sort wild apples? Do you need to wash them right away, or can you store them as is? Let's take a closer look at the steps involved in preparing wild apples for eating. Cleaning and sorting. To clean wild apples, start by rinsing them under cold running water to remove any loose dirt or debris. You can also use a soft bristled brush to gently scrub away any stubborn dirt or stains. Next, sort the apples by size, shape, and color to ensure you're using the best ones for your recipe. Consider separating the apples into different categories, such as apples that are perfect for eating fresh, apples that are better suited for cooking or baking, apples that are too small or damaged to use. You can also use this opportunity to inspect the apples for any signs of mold, rot, or pest damage. Remove any apples that are damaged or show signs of decay, as they can spoil the rest of the batch. Storage methods. When it comes to storing wild apples, you have several options depending on how long you plan to keep them. For short-term storage, you can store the apples in a cool, dry place, such as a pantry or cupboard. This will help maintain their freshness and flavor for several days. For longer-term storage, consider using a root cellar or a cold storage room. You can also use airtight containers or bags to store the apples, making sure to remove as much air as possible before sealing. Some other storage options to consider include refrigeration. Store the apples in the refrigerator to keep them fresh for several weeks. Freezing. Core and chop the apples, then freeze them in airtight containers or bags for later use in recipes. Dehydrating. Slice the apples thin and dry them in a dehydrator or oven to make crispy apple snacks. By storing your wild apples properly, you can enjoy them throughout the year and make the most of your foraging efforts. What's your favorite way to store wild apples, and do you have any tips to share? Wild apple recipes. Now that you've foraged and prepared your wild apples, it's time to get creative in the kitchen. Wild apples are incredibly versatile and can be used in a variety of sweet and savory dishes. From classic desserts like pies and crisps to savory dishes like stews and salads, the possibilities are endless. What's your favorite way to use wild apples in cooking and baking? Do you have a go-to recipe or are you looking for some new ideas to try? Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll explore even more ways to cook with these amazing apples. Thank you for watching. Please remember to like, share and subscribe.